All right, we are going to get started. Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with Clergy on this Thursday after a blizzard. It's nice to be here with all of you. I can see in the chat people are getting their coffee ready. I myself have my seltzer ready to drink. If I drink coffee at this time of day, I'll never sleep again. But it is my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. My name is Rabbi Rebecca Rosenthal. I'm the Director of Youth and Family at Central. And I am joined today by Rena Allen, who is our Director of Special Education and Developmental Learning at Central. She works in the nursery school and in the LCLJ in our religious school, really supporting our teachers and our parents and our students in making sure that Central is a learning environment that is accessible to all and where everyone can belong. And I am also very excited to have my friend Melinda Weddi here today. She is a yoga teacher and a disability advocate and a communications associate for Little Lobbyists, which she will definitely be telling you more about. And she is coming to us live from Pittsburgh. Rena is coming to us live from Washington Heights. And I'm coming to you from the Central Synagogue building. So hi, everyone. It's really nice to see you this morning or this afternoon, I guess, because it's 12:01 now. Rena, why don't we start with you? Will you introduce yourself and tell us a little, before we do that, we are here actually in celebration of Jewish Disabilities Awareness Month, which is the month of February. And this month is really to raise awareness in the Jewish community about Jews with disabilities, as we know there are many, and also to talk about what we can do to make our spaces inclusive of all people, from all backgrounds, of all abilities. And I'm just really thrilled that we have Rena and Melinda here to discuss that with me, because they are experts in this area. We talk a lot in our Jewish life about everyone being created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And this is one of the ways that we really honor that pledge, and that idea that everyone, no matter what, is created in the image of God and is part of our community. So I'm going to ask Rena to start and tell us a little bit about herself and how she got into this work.
Hi, everyone, and I'm told that I should start by telling you what I'm drinking for Coffee with Clergy. I'm drinking coffee. Don't tell any of the diehards, but it's decaf. But like Rebecca, caffeine is not something that is necessary in my life. Anyway, I'm thrilled to be with you today, and I'll start just by telling you a little bit how I came to Central, which is that 8 years ago now, I came to Central by way of the LCLJ, and at the time, Central was taking a closer look at their educational spaces and how they could create them to be more inclusive. And they're working with a phenomenal organization called Matan. Shout out to Matan if you're listening. And Matan suggested at the time that Central bring on a learning specialist for their religious school. And that was me. I connected with someone who worked with Matan, and so I started working with Central. And since then, I've expanded what I do for Central Synagogue. I continue to work with the LCLJ, which, if I didn't mention, is the religious school at Central Synagogue. And I've now, as Rebecca said, work in the nursery school, in the May Family Nursery School. And for the LCLJ, I work with the educators and I work with the families. And in the nursery school, I work with the teachers. I observe in the classrooms. I work with the parents. I come to inclusion work from a background in special education. So my focus is really on education and child development, and I kind of learned along the way and continue to learn about the accessibility world and the world of disability. I always loved working with kids. I loved kind of figuring out how they each worked and how I loved observing how different they were. And so I started as a classroom teacher. I switched to work in early intervention because I wanted to work one-on-one with a family and really kind of support the parents and support a child one-on-one. And now I've zoomed out again a little bit. I zoomed out again to support schools and teachers administrators, like I mentioned before. And the last thing I'll say is just that the Jewish education piece and my real love of Jewish education was inspired by my parents and the gift that they gave me of an unbelievable Jewish education. And it really fueled my passion for making Jewish education accessible to all types of learners. So that's me.
Melinda, will you do the same? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to this kind of work.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I, um, no, um, I started in my past life. Before I had kids, I was briefly a teacher at an alternative school in a high school for students who were on the verge of failing out or who had attendance issues or disciplinary issues. And then I quit that job to be a stay-at-home mom. And then when my son started school, he ended up needing an IEP. And I just kind of fell into advocacy for him because I felt like he needed more. And I also have epilepsy. So through working with him, through working with him, I found that I needed a community of my own. I found a community of my own, and I found that talking to adults with disabilities helped me understand what he would need more, because there's the world of parents of kids with disabilities, but there's also adults with disabilities, and you get more of an understanding of what your child is going to need when you actually talk to people with lived experience and not just quote unquote experts who have studied the medical text and things like that. And so I found myself bringing him to the table at his meetings as well and giving him the voice to say, this is what I need. Talking to the teachers and saying, this is what I need in the classroom, and this is what helps, and this is what doesn't. So it's not just me, it's my son as well.
So one of the things that the three of us, have talked a lot about in preparation for this conversation has a lot to do with language. We've talked about the words accessibility, inclusion, disability, belonging, and Melinda has been a great teacher to me around the idea of what kind of language we use when we talk about people with disabilities, when we talk about what does inclusion mean. And so I'm wondering, either one of you or both of you, if you had thoughts on that, but also as we think about Central as a community, what are some pieces of language that we can start using here in our community that would make our community more accessible?
I can start. So I think in schools, there's such the heavy focus on inclusion. There's inclusion specialists, and there's all sorts of things. There's schools that are so proud of their, we include everyone. Everyone matters here. But then there's the issue of when you include people, do they really feel like they belong? Are they sitting there and they're included? Are they welcomed with open arms? Do they feel like they belong? Do they have friends? Is everybody included on the field trip? Are field trips accessible? Are they wheelchair accessible? Are they sensory accessible? Because once you make something like a field trip wheelchair accessible, you make sure that you're not going on a trip to, like, say, for example, a botanical garden where there's going to be narrow pathways that a wheelchair might not fit on. That might not be accessible to a student with a wheelchair. Or if you go somewhere that's super loud, that might be an issue with somebody with sensory issues. that's not going to be accessible to all of your students. So they might be included, like you're welcome to come, but do they feel like they belong? So once you pick something like a field trip, that is accessible to everybody and everyone feels like they belong, that's something that's universal. Um, and then everybody feels like they belong. So once you have people who are, everybody belongs, then it's going to be a great field trip for everybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about our Purim Carnival. Mel, I don't know if you've ever been to a Purim Carnival, but it's basically the loudest, most sensory overload place on earth. And even if like sensory is not your main issue, it could become your issue in a Purim Carnival. And a couple of years ago, we decided we would open the Purim Carnival early and have sort of a quiet couple of hours before the carnival really got overwhelmed with people. And one thing that we saw actually is that a lot of kids who we didn't identify as having sort of sensory issues came to the quiet carnival because they were like, this is very much better to, especially like the really young kids, to be in a space that, as you said, is accessible to everybody. So it wasn't just open if you had identified sensory processing issues, but it really was open to anybody, and it ended up being a space that people really enjoyed, probably for some of them more than the kind of overwhelming Purim Carnival. Rena probably remembers that.
Definitely. And it's interesting when you say about language, and Melinda, I'm interested in what you think about this. But one thing that I learned many, many years ago that has kind of fallen in and out of the proper thing to do is something called person-centered language. And it's something that I taught when I do trainings with teachers. I always bring it up. And the way that I talk about it is person-centered language is putting the person before the disability. So instead of saying a deaf person, a person who is deaf. What I've learned over the years is that that's not necessarily the right way to speak. And someone who is deaf or a deaf person might prefer to be called a deaf person than a person who is deaf. Especially in the deaf community, there's a lot of pride, and it's a whole kind of other world that I'm not a part of because I'm not deaf. And so the takeaway from that for me, and what I try to teach the people that I work with, is that it's about the person and how the person prefers to be referred to. And that's where that's kind of what touched me, Melinda, about what you said about your son. When you brought your son to the table, that's actually what matters, is the person with the disability. As someone like myself who doesn't have a disability, I can only kind of decide so much without speaking to the people who it matters most to.
Right. And that's so important. Same with autism. Like it used to be so much like a person with autism, a person on the spectrum, and now it's very much autistic person. There's a lot of we've moved they've moved away from awareness and more on acceptance, because you can't take it off. You can't, like I'm not carrying it with me. You're not carrying your autism with you. You're not carrying your deafness with you. So you're not something with that because it's very much a part of you. So that's why you would say an autistic person or a deaf person. Me personally, I prefer to say a person with epilepsy, just because that's my preference. So I would always say to default, if you are unsure, to ask the person, like you said. But with regards to language, also, I know a lot of us have moved away from saying special needs, because that's infantilizing, I feel like. And it also kind of feels like, you get special treatment. When everybody has the same needs, you know, they have the need for connection. People with kids with disabilities have the need for connection, the need for friendship, the need for education, just the same as an equal education, the same for everybody else. The need is just to make the education accessible, make the education work for them. So that's just, we've moved away from that.
One thing that we were talking about is um, creating spaces that are accessible to all, as you said, Melinda, so that which means that no one is singled out to say, you are creating this burden on our community because of your wheelchair. So we're gonna do this special thing for you, because we don't. One of the ways that we create accessible spaces is by making people feel like they're open to everybody. As you said, like with the field trip, that this idea that if we're going somewhere, it should be somewhere where everybody can participate fully, everybody can be a part of whatever it is that they're doing. And I'm curious to hear from both of you, what are some other ways, especially in communal settings, that you've seen places get that right, places do that well?
So one thing that we kind of my first piece of advice to a community that is looking more closely at this is know who's there, know who is in your community. It's a place to start. And so something that Central took on in the last many years is having a mission statement that includes inclusion. And I also want to say that is certainly not the most important part, because a statement is only a statement, and lots of really non-inclusive places have beautiful statements. So what's most important is to back it up with your actions. And so things that we have done at Central in terms of our membership and asking members what kind of accommodations they may need. And in our educational spaces, we ask on registration forms, are there learning needs or other needs that you want to tell us about? And part of my portfolio at Central is having something that I call intake meetings, which is any family that either identifies their child as having a learning need or any kind of developmental background that we should know about. I invite them to have a meeting with me. Now those are on Zoom. They used to be in person. And we start from the beginning. And it's the time, the most important outcome of those meetings is the relationship that begins. And I ask families to kind of catch me up on their family background and what they've learned about their child and what we should know about them and how they best learn and what kind of learning environments are successful for them. And so, I get from information that's helpful for the teachers and that's helpful for the school to know how we can improve our environment. But most important is making that connection and having families know that there's somewhere to go and, someone that also speaks the language and the relationship goes on from there. So that I would say is kind of the number one thing, but there's a list, but I'll hand it over to Melinda.
So I would say my experience is more in an organizational setting, for example, like political organizing, volunteering. I would say a best practice would be to have the accessibility needs just there already. So do some research to know what people are going to need without making them ask for it or without reaching out and making people disclose. Because, I know it's different in an educational setting where people need to disclose for certain accommodations and tracking. Let's say you were going to, in pre-Zoom times, say we were going to host, a political organizing meeting, or something like that. Be sure to have your accessible entryway in a space that's not in the back of the building, so people don't have to enter where the dumpsters are. Does that make sense? Because a lot of times the wide doorways are hard to find. They're in the back. Make sure you have wide spaces for seating, wide hallways. Make sure that you have a quiet, dark place where people can take a break. So there's not, so in case they get overwhelmed. If you want to go the next step, be sure to not have overwhelming fragrances, because that can be overwhelming to the senses. And I've been in an experience before where somebody actually had an asthma attack from someone else's deodorant. So there are just a lot of things that you might not realize until you experience it, or somebody tells you. And also for Zoom, I'm not sure if it's happening now, but captions. I know that Zoom does charge extra for that, and that's unfortunate. But just those type of things. If you're in a large in-person setting, an ASL interpreter. These are just things that should be baseline for a lot of things, so people don't need to ask. That's just the beginning, I think.
I just want to jump in here to say that currently we have closed captioning through Facebook, but Zoom did actually.
Okay, I couldn't see.
Yeah, but Zoom did just add it as a free feature. It's with, I guess it's only with the paid accounts, but it is now included, and they're pretty good and fairly accurate.
That's good news. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about sort of one of the, I think, biggest hurdles in Jewish learning life, which is the bar and bat mitzvah experience. There is, as a general rule, a picture in people's heads about what it means for a child to become bar and bat mitzvah, not just at Central, but in almost any Jewish setting, which involves a lot of Hebrew reading the Torah and the Haftorah, probably giving a speech, giving a Devar Torah, right? Reading your Torah portion in English, which can, for people who are rabbis and have good grasp of what is happening in the Torah, can be very challenging. And then analyzing and writing it. Sometimes it's leading prayers. There's also, in many instances, a lot of moving around, up and down, sitting, standing. And so the bar and bat mitzvah, I think people imagine it to look one particular way and then say, well, that is not for me, because my child, that's not going to work for my child. That's not going to work for me. We have, adults who become bar and bat mitzvah also. And so, Rena, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what Central has done. And then Melinda, although I know you didn't have a bat mitzvah, I know you've been in that world, and whether there are other things that we can do, that places can do, that might make the experience more accessible to all. And I will also just put out there before Rena talks to say, like, this is something that we want and value at Central. And so we want to make it so you don't have to ask, but if we are doing something that is putting a barrier in your way, we hope that you will ask, so that we can do better.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say about the Bnei Mitzvah process, and really about our educational settings within Central, is that the most important is that we come from what's called a strengths-based perspective, and to first look at a child or an adult, really any kind of learner, for where their strengths are. And often that is kind of the way in to work on the things that are more challenging to the person. But whenever I sit down with teachers or anyone to talk about a particular child who's maybe having a hard time or something's going on, we always start by talking about the strengths first, and that is kind of utmost importance. In terms of the bar and bat mitzvah, the Bnei Mitzvah setting at Central, I agree with Rebecca. I think it's an area where people kind of feel that they have to fit in to a mold, and we have tried really hard to make it a more accessible experience. We have learned a lot about teaching Hebrew, and that has kind of been the fundamental, one of the fundamental barriers for kids, certainly with language-based learning disabilities and things like that. And our tutors have taken time, and our clergy have taken time to learn about the tools and the things that support learners who have a hard time with language to learn it a different way, do it a different way. We don't have two kids that learn for their Bnei Mitzvah exactly the same way. And I'm also available. I meet with tutors all the time. I connect with the clergy study to talk about, the families that we know and the ways that we can best support a family. We've also made all kinds of things available in terms of having a smaller service in a smaller setting, if that's something that a family or a child is interested. We've had many families say to us, my child isn't interested in the big kind of bima in our big, very grand, very beautiful sanctuary. It's just not for them. And so we have made, other kinds of accommodations. We've had printed Dvar Torah, which is words of Torah that a Bnei Mitzvah child shares on the day of their bar mitzvah, where we might print it out and hand it out instead of asking a child to read in front of a crowd, which is not necessarily their thing. We had one family do a Dvar Torah in dialogue, that a parent and a child did it together. So our most important thing is that we're communicating and that families know that we're here for you. And our clergy says we have 100% success rate. We are always going to we're always going to make it work and make it be what it should be for the child who that day is about.
That all sounds really great. I like the idea of having it printed, because I know there are, kids who would be uncomfortable or even unable to speak in front of a crowd. I think that's all really, really great. Those are all great accommodations. I don't even know if I have anything to add on that, honestly. I think you guys sound like you're doing fantastic. I mean, just making people aware that those, I think it's just the utmost important that people know that those are aware without having to ask for them. Because sometimes people are just afraid to ask or embarrassed to ask, like you said, because people have a picture in their mind of how they want a certain milestone to be. And I think it's important. I think it's becoming more acceptable to, that not everything has to look the same.
And I'll just say that it's we don't feel we've kind of like achieved. I don't think inclusion is a thing that has an end. It's been a journey and it will be a journey. It's something that we're constantly looking at and growing and learning from.
So we only have a couple more minutes, so I want to ask one final question, which is if you could give a piece of advice to um, an individual looking to sort of walk through the world with a more inclusive mindset and vision, what would you tell people to either do or read or learn about, or any advice you have for people as individuals, since we've spoken a lot about the community?
I think that the most important thing is what you already said, Rebecca, which is to learn and read and talk to the people who have disabilities and talk to people who are, more kind of at the core of the world. I think two great resources are, I mentioned earlier, Matan organization. They're an amazing Jewish educational resource, and also the Ruderman Foundation, also an excellent resource, more kind of towards the bigger picture world of accessibility and disability. And I would just end by saying that, which I already said, which is that inclusion is not, it's a constant aspiration. It's not a thing that we have to get to an end. It's a constant moving, growing aspiration, and important to know where the resources are to help you along that.
I agree. It's just, I'm a constant student. I learn from Rebecca every day. And I would say a fabulous thing is if you have Netflix, watch Crip Camp. It's a documentary. And it's, learning disability history is something that is invaluable. And also, if you have the time, check out Neurotribes by Steve Silberman. It's a book. And just have disabled friends if you can make them, and have those be, try an authentic friendship. And if you have kids with disabilities, and a mentor, and a teen mentor, an adult mentor, an authentic mentor to help you with your parenting it's invaluable, because an adult with the lived experience is just so helpful, because there's so much information about especially like autistic children, but then once you reach 18, the information is not there anymore. So those resources are just, you can't put a price on that. You really can't.
Just want to add one more piece, which is that in our small groups program at Central, we have a relatively newly formed group called Disability Matters, and they're focusing on learning the Jewish value and the Jewish view on disability and human value. And if you're interested in that, our adult education department is a great resource.
Thank you, Rena. I was going to ask you to plug that, so thank you for doing that. So I just want to thank Melinda and Rena so much for being here and being my teachers and mentors, and for really pushing me and pushing Central to be a place of deeper inclusion. And if there are barriers that we are setting up that we don't see, or if you heard this and you are thinking, wow, like I thought my child or myself as an adult couldn't do this thing, and I now see that Central is a place that I can do it. Please reach out, because we want to really make sure that there is a sense of belonging at Central, and not just that we're making a special accommodation for you, but really that you belong in this community. So thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to everyone who's watching us on Facebook, and we will see you on Tuesday for the next Coffee with Clergy.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.